All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started with chapter 38. But before we do, let me try something real fast. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 38, Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Here we go. The Long Road to Clover. On January 18th, 2009, on a cold, sunny Sunday, I pulled off the highway onto the road into Clover. As I passed one green field after the next, I thought, I don't remember the road into Clover being so long. Then I realized I'd just passed the Clover post office. It was across the street from a big, empty field. But it used to be across the street from the rest of downtown. I didn't understand. If that was the post office, where was everything else? I kept driving for a moment, thinking, did they move the post office? Then it hit me. Clover was gone. I jumped out of the car and ran into the field to the spot where the old movie theater once stood, where Henrietta and Cliff once watched Buck Jones films. It was gone. So was Gregory and Martin's grocery and Abbott's clothing store. I stood with my hand over my mouth, staring in disbelief at the empty field until I realized there were splinters of brick and small white plaster tiles pressed into the dirt and grass. I knelt down and began collecting them, filling my pockets with what remained of the town of Henrietta's youth. I have to send some of this to Deborah, I thought. She's not going to believe Clover is gone. Standing on Main Street, staring at the corpse of Clover's downtown, it felt like everything related to Henrietta's history was vanishing. In 2002, just 1 year after Gary had wrapped his hands around Deborah's head and passed the burden of the cells on to me, he died suddenly at the age of 52 from a heart attack. He'd been walking toward Cootie's car, carrying his best suit to put in the trunk so it wouldn't get wrinkled on the way to Cootie's mother's funeral. A few months later, Deborah called me to say that Cliff's brother, Fred, had died from throat cancer. Next it was Day, who died of a stroke, surrounded by his family. Then Cootie, who killed himself with a shotgun. Each time someone died, Deborah called, crying. I thought the calls would never end. Death just following us, and this story, everywhere we go, she'd say. But I'm hanging in there. In the years that followed the baptism, not much changed for the Laxes. Babette and Lawrence went on with their lives. Lawrence didn't think about the cells much anymore, though occasionally he and Zachariah still entertained the idea of suing Hopkins. Sonny had a quintuple bypass in 2003 when he was 56 years old. The last thing he remembered before falling unconscious under the anesthesia was a doctor standing over him, saying his mother's cells were one of the most important things that had ever happened to medicine. Sonny woke up more than $125,000 in debt because he didn't have health insurance to cover the surgery. Zachariah got kicked out of his assisted living facility, then a Section 8 housing project, where he smashed a 40-ounce beer bottle over a woman's back and pushed her through a plate glass window. He sometimes worked with Sonny, driving a truck. In 2004, Deborah left her husband and moved into an assisted living apartment of her own, which she'd longed to do for years. She was tired of fighting with Pullum, plus their row house had too many stairs. After she moved out to cover her bills, she went to work full-time for her daughter, Tanya, who had opened an assisted living home in her house. Each morning, Deborah left the assisted living facility where she lived and spent the day cooking and cleaning for the 5 or 6 men living in her daughter's home. She quit after 2 years because her body couldn't take walking up and down the stairs all day. When Deborah officially divorced Pullum in 2006, she had to itemize her income as part of a request for the judge to waive her filing fee. She listed $732 per month from Social Security, disability, and $10 per month in food stamps. Her checking account was empty. When I went back to visit Clover and found Main Street razed, it had been a few months since Deborah and I talked. During our last call, I told her that the book was done, and she'd said she wanted me to come to Baltimore and read it to her so I could talk to her through the hard parts. I'd called several times since to plan the visit, but she hadn't returned my calls. I left messages, but didn't push her. She needs some space to prepare herself, I thought. She'll call when she's ready. When I got home from Clover, I called again saying, "I brought something back for you from Clover. You won't believe what's happened down there." But she didn't call back. On May 21st, 2009, after leaving many messages, I called again. Her voicemail box was full. So I dialed Sonny's number to say something I'd said to him many times over the years. "Will you tell your sister to stop messing around and return my calls? I really need to talk to her. Our time is running out." When he answered the phone, I said, "Hey, Sonny, it's Rebecca," and for a moment, the line went silent. "I've been trying to find your phone number," he said, and my eyes filled with tears. I knew there was only one reason Sonny would need to call me. Deborah had gone over to her niece's house on Mother's Day, a week and a half before my call. Sonny had made crab cakes for her, the grandchildren were there, and everyone laughed and told stories. After dinner, he took Deborah back to the apartment she loved and said goodnight. She stayed home the next day, ate the leftover crab cakes Sonny sent home with her, and talked to Davon on the phone. He was learning to drive and wanted to come over in the morning to practice. The next morning when he called, she didn't answer. A few hours later, Sonny dropped by to check on her, as he did nearly every day, and found her in bed, arms crossed on her chest, smiling. He thought she was sleeping, so he touched her arm, saying, "Dale, time to get up." But she wasn't sleeping. "She's in a better place now," Sonny told me. "A heart attack just after Mother's Day. She wouldn't have wanted it any other way. She suffered a lot in life, and now she's happy." After finding Deborah in her bed, Sonny cut a lock of her hair and tucked it inside their mother's Bible with the locks of hair from Henrietta and Elsie. "She's with them now," he told me. "You know there's no place in the world she'd rather be." Deborah was happy when she died. Her grandson, little Alfred, was now 12, headed into the 8th grade, and doing well in school. Lawrence and Babette's granddaughter Erica had gotten into Penn State after writing an admission essay about how her great-grandmother, Henrietta Story, had inspired her to study science. After transferring to the University of Maryland, she earned her bachelor's degree and entered a master's program in psychology, becoming the first of Henrietta's descendants to attend graduate school. At 17, Deborah's grandson Davon was about to graduate from high school. He'd promised Deborah he'd go to college and continue learning about Henrietta until he knew everything there was to know about her. "That really made me feel okay about dying whenever my time comes," she told me. As Sonny told me the news of Deborah's death, I sat staring at a framed picture of her that's been on my desk for nearly a decade. In it, her eyes are hard, her brow creased and angry. She's wearing a pink shirt and holding a bottle of pink Benadryl. Everything else is red. Her fingernails, the welts on her face, the dirt beneath her feet. I stared at the picture for days after her death as I listened to hours of tape of us talking and read the notes I'd taken the last time I saw her. At one point, during that visit, Deborah, Davon, and I sat side by side on her bed, our backs to the wall, legs outstretched. We just finished watching two of Deborah's favorite movies back to back, Roots and the animated movie Spirit, about a wild horse who's captured by the U.S. Army. She wanted us to watch them together so we could see the similarities between the two. Spirit fought for his freedom just as Kunta Kinte did in Roots, she said. People was always trying to keep them down and stop them from doing what they want, just like people always doing with me in the story about my mother, she said. When the films ended, Deborah jumped out of bed and put in yet another video. She pressed play, and a younger version of herself appeared on the screen. It was one of nearly a dozen tapes the BBC had recorded that didn't make it into the documentary. On the screen, Deborah sat on the couch with her mother's Bible open in her lap, her hair brown instead of gray, her eyes bright with no circles beneath them. As she talked, her hands stroked the long lock of her mother's hair. "I often visit her hair in the Bible," Deborah said into the camera. "When I think about this hair, I'm not as lonely. I imagine What would it be like to have a mother to go to laugh, cry, hug? God willing, I can be with her someday. I'm looking forward to that. The younger Deborah said she was glad that when she died, she wouldn't have to tell her mother the story of everything that happened with the cells and the family, because Henrietta already knew. She's been watching us and seeing all that's going on down here, Deborah said. She's waiting patiently for us. There won't be any words, just a lot of hugging and crying. I really believe she's up in heaven, and she's doing okay because she did enough suffering for everyone down here. On the other side, they say there's no pain or suffering. I want to be there with my mother. Sitting between me and Davon on the bed, Deborah nodded at her younger self on the screen and said, Heaven looks just like Clover, Virginia. My mother and I always loved it down there more than anywhere else in the world. She stroked Davon's hair. I don't know how I'm going to go, she said. I just hope it's nice and calm, but I tell you one thing. I don't want to be immortal if it means living forever, because then everybody else just die and get old in front of you while you stay the same. That's just sad. Then she smiled. But maybe I'll come back as some ILoHL like my mother. That way we can do good together out there in the world. She paused and nodded again. I think I'd like that. Okay, that was very touching, so I wanted to give a minute there before I went on to the next part. Here is the Where Are They Now section. Okay, so Alfred Carter Jr., Deborah's son, is in prison, still serving a 30-year sentence for robbery with a dangerous and deadly weapon and first-degree assault with a handgun. While incarcerated, he went through drug and alcohol rehabilitation, got his GED, and taught GED classes to other inmates for $25 a month. In 2006, he wrote to the judge who sentenced him, saying he wanted to pay back the money he stole and needed to know who to send it to. Dr. Sir Lord Keenan Kester Cofield's whereabouts are unknown. Most recently, he served several years in prison for trying to buy jewelry at Macy's with a stolen check and filed several lawsuits while incarcerated. In 2008, after being released from prison, Cofield filed a 75-page lawsuit, his last to date, that a judge called incomprehensible. He sued 226 parties for more than $10 billion and argued that past decisions in all his cases should be reversed in his favor, and that anyone who had printed his name without permission should be included in his suit because he'd copyrighted his name. I was never able to get in touch with him to interview him for this book. Cliff Garrett, Henrietta's cousin, lived in his farmhouse in Clover until 2009, when his failing health required him to move in with his son in Richmond, Virginia, where he currently lives. HeLa is still one of the most commonly used cell lines in laboratories around the world. When this book went to press in 2009, more than 60,000 scientific articles had been published about research done on HeLa, and that number was increasing steadily at a rate of more than 300 papers each month. HeLa cells are still contaminating other cultures and causing an estimated several $1 million in damage each year. Howard Jones, Henrietta's doctor, is an emeritus professor at Johns Hopkins and Eastern Virginia Medical Schools. He founded the Jones Institute for Reproductive Medicine in Norfolk, Virginia, with his late wife, Georgiana. They were pioneers in the field of infertility treatments and were responsible for the first test tube baby born in the United States. When this book went to press, he was 99 years old. Mary Kubitschek is retired and living in Maryland. Zachariah, Sonny, and Lawrence Lax were deeply affected by Deborah's death. Lawrence charged more than $6,000 to his credit cards to cover the cost of burial, and when this book went to press, Sonny was saving money to buy her a tombstone. Zachariah stopped drinking and began studying the lives of yogis and others who had achieved inner peace. He started spending more time with his family, including his many nieces and nephews, who hug and kiss him on a regular basis. He smiles often. Sonny has sworn to uphold Deborah's desire to gain recognition for their mother. Today, when the Lax brothers talk about Henrietta, they focus on the importance of her contributions to science. They no longer talk about suing Johns Hopkins. though Lawrence and Zachariah still believe they're owed a share of the profits from HeLa cells. Christoph Lengauer is global head of oncology drug discovery at Sanofi Aventis, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Many of the scientists working for him use HeLa on a regular routine basis. He lives in Paris, France. Davon Mead and little Alfred Jr., Deborah's grandsons, live in Baltimore, as do 22 of Henrietta's other descendants, including her grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. 2 others live in California. John Moore appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which refused to hear his case. He died in 2001. Roland Patillo is a professor at Morehouse School of Medicine, where he continues to hold his HeLa conference in Henrietta's honor each year. Patillo and his wife, Pat, plan to buy a marker for Henrietta's grave to be placed near her mother's tombstone in the Lax family cemetery. James Pullum, Deborah's ex-husband, is still preaching in Baltimore. And finally, Courtney Speed still runs her grocery store, where she continues to teach local children to do math and hopes to open a Henrietta Lacks museum. All right, there we go.